The hum of the aircraft cabin was a low, steady drone, a soundtrack for expensive perfume and pre-flight champagne flutes. In seat 2A, a woman settled in, her fingers tracing the butter-soft leather of the armrest. She was dressed not in business attire or vacation linen, but in a simple, clean uniform of navy blue trousers and a polo shirt, a small embroidered name tag over her heart, Kendra. Her posture was weary, the kind of deep-seated fatigue that no amount of sleep could touch, but her eyes, as she looked out at the rain-streaked tarmac, held a quiet, unwavering resolve. A laugh, sharp and brittle, cut through the calm skews. I think there's been a mistake." The man in 2B was all polished loafers and a smirk, holding his boarding pass like a winning lottery ticket. He wasn't talking to Kendra, he was talking past her, to the flight attendant. "This seat," he said, pointing vaguely in Kendra's direction, his voice loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "It's supposed to be for a first-class passenger." Kendra didn't turn. She kept her gaze on the window, on the rivulets of water, racing down the glass. She'd breathed in, slow and deep, a practiced technique. The flight attendant, a young woman with a tense smile, leaned in. "Sir, the seat is correct. Is there a problem?" "The problem," the man said, his smirk widening, "is that the cleaning crew seems to have taken a break in the wrong section." Another laugh, this one joined by a woman across the aisle. "Seriously, check her ticket. This has to be wrong. People like her don't sit here." The words, "people like her," hung in the recycled air, heavy and toxic. They weren't just about class. They were a verdict, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone utterly convinced of their own right to judge. Kendra closed her eyes for a brief second. The humiliation was a hot, familiar flush creeping up her neck, but beneath it, something else simmered. This was her seat. She had paid for it with her own money earned on her hands and knees, buffing floors that people like this man walked on without a second thought. The flight attendant looked desperately between them, her professionalism warring with a clear, uncomfortable paralysis. The man raised his hand, snapping his fingers. "For attention, can we get a manager? Or the pilot? Someone with authority to sort this situation out." He said situation like it was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. Why was he so certain she didn't belong? And what would happen when the one person with true authority on this plane arrived? 10 hours before she boarded the plane, Kendra Williams was on her knees. Not in prayer, though sometimes it felt like it. She was in the executive washroom on the 45th floor of the Sterling Financial Tower, scrubbing a porcelain sink with a meticulous, circular motion. The cleaner smelled sharply of citrus and bleach, a scent that had woven itself into the fabric of her life. Her uniform, identical to the one she wore now, was crisp. Her hands, though, told a different story. They were strong, capable hands, marked with the faint ghosts of old chemical burns and the dry cracks that no lotion could ever fully heal. For 23 years, Kendra had been a janitor for Apex Building Services. She didn't just clean, she maintained, she restored, she made the invisible world of order and shine possible. She knew which vice president liked his trash emptied before noon and which assistant needed disinfecting wipes for her perpetual cold. She moved through the glittering corridors of power after hours, a ghost in the machine, listening to the echoes of deals and dismissals that lingered in the empty air. Her life outside those corridors was built on the foundation of that work. It paid the mortgage on a small, meticulously kept house in a neighborhood the executives would never drive through. It paid for her daughter Amara's textbooks at Howard University. It was currently paying for this first-class ticket to see Amara graduate summa cum laude with a degree in aerospace engineering. The ticket had cost Kendra 3 extra months of overtime, of skipping lunches, of patching her work shoes instead of replacing them. It was not an indulgence, it was a monument, a landmark she had built herself, brick by aching brick, to sit in a wide seat and arrive rested and proud for her daughter's day. The man in 2B, as she would later learn from a dropped credit card, was Gavin Thorne, a venture capitalist. His world was one of leveraged buyouts and speaking in percentages of ownership. He was used to spaces conforming to him, to people moving out of his way. To him, first class wasn't just a seat, it was a filter, a guarantee that everyone around him had been pre-approved, pre-vetted, was of a certain caliber. Kendra, in her uniform, was a system error, a glitch in the matrix of his entitlement. His mockery wasn't just personal contempt. It was a public recalibration of what he saw as a broken social order. As the flight attendant retreated to the galley, flustered, Gavin leaned back, addressing the cabin at large. Unbelievable they'll let anyone up here these days. Ruins the whole experience for those of us who actually earn it. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One older man in 3A caught Kendra's eye for a moment, a flicker of sympathy there. Before he looked down at his newspaper, no one spoke up. The price of peace in a metal tube at 30,000 feet was often silence. Kendra finally turned from the window. She looked directly at Gavin, not with anger, but with a calm, assessing gaze. It was the look she gave a stained carpet or a graffiti-tagged wall before she got to work. She saw the insecurity hiding behind his bluster, the need for an audience. She saw him. "You're right," she said, her voice low and clear, carrying a lifetime of being heard in empty halls. "I did earn it, every single penny." Gavin blinked, startled by the direct response. Then he snorted. "Right, I'm sure." He turned to his companion, probably using some kind of welfare points. The injustice of it was a physical weight on Kendra's chest. But the audience, the public spectacle, was the trap. If she raged, she'd be the angry black woman. If she cried, she'd be weak. So she did what she had done for 23 years. She absorbed the stain, and she held her ground. She was sitting in this seat for Amara. For every night she'd come home bottom tired. For every dream she'd deferred that now lived in her daughter. This seat was hers. But as the whispers and stolen glances swirled around her, the victory of being there felt hollow, poised by the man whose very presence sought to erase her dignity. The conflict simmered, a low heat threatening to boil over. The senior flight attendant, a man named Robert with weary eyes and a neat mustache, arrived. Gavin launched into his complaint with the efficiency of a CEO in a boardroom. "This is a simple case of mistaken seating. This employee is clearly in the wrong section. I demand you relocate her." Robert's eyes flicked to Kendra's boarding pass, which she wordlessly handed over. He scanned it, then the manifest on his tablet. "Sir, the seat assignment is correct. Ms. Williams is confirmed in 2A. Gavin's face flushed. "Then your system is broken. Look at her. This is clearly a case of someone finding a lost ticket or sir." Robert interrupted, his voice firm but fraying at the edges. "The ticket is valid. The seat is hers. Now, please, we have a flight to prepare for." Defeated on one front, Gavin opened another. As Robert moved away, Gavin began a running commentary, just loud enough to be a nuisance. When Kendra placed her simple, well-worn bag under the seat in front of her, he quipped to his companion, "Traveling light. Must be a day trip from the mailroom." When she declined the pre-flight champagne, asking for water instead, he murmured, "Probably doesn't know what it is." Each barb was a small, precise cut. Kendra felt them all. She thought of Amara, of the brilliant, confident young woman she was, who had never had to shrink herself to make others comfortable. She held on to that image like a talisman, but the emotional setback was profound. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, a quiet celebration of a lifetime of labor. Instead, it was being turned into a cage of humiliation. The plane pushed back from the gate. As the engines whined to life, a new character entered the scene, a young, blonde woman in 1C, who had been typing furiously on her laptop, turned round. She had the sharp, eager look of a junior associate. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice bright with recognition. "Gavin Thorne. I thought that was you. I'm Chloe Benson, from the Business Insider podcast. We had you scheduled for an interview next month on disruptive market strategies." Gavin's demeanor transformed instantly. The petulant bully melted away, replaced by the polished, visionary entrepreneur, Chloe. "Of course. A pleasure to meet in person." He shot a sideways glance at Kendra, as if to say, "See? This is the company I keep." Chloe, sensing an opportunity for an impromptu pre-interview, asked, "Mind if I pick your brain during the flight?" Off the record, of course. And so, a new stage was set. With an eager audience of one, Gavin's performance expanded. He spoke loudly about merit and building value, about cutting deadweight from companies. Each buzzword felt like a directed missile. Kendra tried to put on her headphones, but the plane's PA system crackled before she could. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're just waiting for our slot from air traffic control. Should be up in the air shortly. For your safety, please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." The voice was calm, authoritative, and deeply familiar to Kendra. Her breath caught. She knew that voice. She knew the warm, steady baritone that had read bedtime stories over crackling phone lines for years. It was the voice of Captain Marcus Thorne, Amara's father. The revelation hit her like a gust of turbulence. Marcus, she hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since their young, passionate relationship had fractured under the pressures of his flight school and her pregnancy. He'd wanted her to terminate it. He wasn't ready. She had chosen Amara. They'd parted, not with hatred, but with a deep, irrevocable sorrow. He had sent money, erratically at first, then consistently. He had called, trying to be a father, from a distance, and 5 years ago they had found a fragile peace for Amara's sake. He had paid for half of her tuition. He was proud of her, but Kendra had no idea he was piloting this flight. A wild, desperate hope flickered in her chest. Then, just as quickly, it was doused by a wave of shame. She couldn't call for help. She wouldn't. She had spent a lifetime solving her own problems, swallowing her own pride. To be rescued now, by him of all people, felt like admitting defeat in a war she'd been fighting alone for 2 decades. The tension within her ratcheted tighter. Gavin, meanwhile, emboldened by Chloe's attention, decided to escalate. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Kendra reached into her bag and pulled out a small, framed photograph. It was of her and Amara at high school graduation, their smiles brilliant and matching. She placed it gently on her tray table, a touchstone. Gavin peered over. "Cute," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "Your granddaughter." Kendra's jaw tightened. "My daughter? Really? She looks ... bright. Got her father's features." "I assume." The insinuation was as ugly as it was clear. Kendra felt the last thread of her composure begin to unravel. She was about to speak, her voice trembling with a fury she could no longer contain, when the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off, and from the forward galley, Captain Marcus Thorne stepped out of the cockpit. He was tall, his pilot's uniform sharp and commanding, the 4 gold stripes on his epaulets gleaming. He had aged, his hair now more salt than pepper, but his eyes were the same, intelligent, kind, and at this moment, scanning the cabin with the pilot's practiced ease. He was making his customary greeting round of first class. His gaze swept over the rows, a professional smile on his face. It passed over Gavin, over Chloe, then it landed on Kendra in tour. Time seemed to stutter, to freeze. His professional mask slipped, revealing a man utterly blindsided. His eyes went from her face, to her uniform, to the photograph on her tray, to the smug, smirking man beside her who had just insulted the mother of his child. Kendra saw the journey in Marcus's eyes, then too dawning comprehension as he read the room, the tense posture of the flight attendants, the uneasy silence from other passengers, Gavin's posture of triumph. Marcus's eyes finally locked with Kendra's. In them, she didn't see pity. She saw a question, a storm of protectiveness, and a deep, old pain. He gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. A message. "I see you. I see this." He continued his walk, stopping to shake a passenger's hand, but his energy had changed. Oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, saw an opportunity. As Marcus approached his row, Gavin stood up, blocking the aisle slightly, his hand extended. "Captain?" "Wonderful aircraft." Marcus shook his hand, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thorne." "Thank you, Captain. I must say, while your service is excellent, there seems to be a persistent issue with seeding validation in this cabin." He gestured dismissively toward Kendra. "A bit of a mix-up, but your crew is handling it." Marcus looked from Gavin to Kendra. She held his gaze, her chin high, her eyes now glistening with unshed tears of rage and a history too complex to name. She gave a tiny, almost defiant shake of her head. Marcus understood. He released Gavin's hand. "I trust my crew implicitly, Mr. Thorne. They follow procedures to the letter." His voice was cool, neutral. "Enjoy your flight." He moved on, but as he passed Kendra's seat, his fingers brushed lightly against the back of her headrest. It was a ghost of a touch, a secret signal. And he was gone, back toward the cockpit, closing the door softly behind him. The confrontation was deferred, but the atmosphere was now electrically charged. The passengers had sensed it. Robert, the flight attendant, had seen the captain's recognition. Gavin, for the first time, looked vaguely uncertain. He had expected the captain to side with him, to affirm his grievance. He had been politely at what had that nod meant? What was Marcus thinking behind that closed door? The injustice still sat, raw and exposed, in the seat next to her. But now, for the first time, she wasn't alone with it. A potential ally, a complicated, painful piece of her past, was in the one seat on the aircraft that held ultimate authority. The power imbalance in row 2 had just been subtly, irrevocably altered. The question was no longer whether Gavin would win, but what form the reckoning would take. For the next hour, a brittle silence reigned in row 2. Gavin had retreated into sullen quiet, occasionally whispering to Chloe, who now seemed less enamored and more like someone who had stumbled into a minefield. Kendra stared at the photograph. Of Amara, her daughter's smiling face was no longer just a source of pride. It was a mirror in that reflection. Kendra didn't just see Amara. She saw herself at that age full of a fire that life had slowly banked. She saw all the times she had bowed her head, had bitten her tongue, had let a comment slide for the sake of peace. At work, at the store, in line at the bank. The 1,000 tiny cuts that she had accepted as the price of existing in spaces that were never meant for her. She had done it to survive, to provide, to build a world for her daughter where she wouldn't have to. But here, now, at 37,000 feet, on a journey that was the culmination of all that sacrifice, she realized something with crystalline clarity. By accepting the humiliation, she was teaching Amara the wrong lesson. She was inadvertently passing on the burden of silence. Amara, who wanted to build flying machines, would face her own Gavin Thornes in boardrooms and engineering labs. Would Kendra have her shrink herself too? No, the turning point wasn't a loud declaration. It was a quiet, internal detonation. The acceptance shattered. The resolve that replaced it was cold, hard, and strategic. She would no longer just endure his injustice. She would document it. And she would hold her space, not just physically in the seat, but energetically. She would reclaim her dignity, not through his apology, which would be meaningless, but through her own unassailable presence. She took out her phone. She opened her notes app. With calm, deliberate strokes, she began to type. Not an emotional rant, but a record. Asterisk time, 14:35. Subject, passenger, to be Gavin Thorne, per credit card. Statement, this seat is for a first-class passenger. Implication, I am not one. Asterisk time, 14:41. Subject, passenger 2B. Statement 2 companion re. My bag, traveling light, must be a day trip from the mailroom. Time, 14:50. Subject, passenger 2B. Statement re. Champagne. Probably doesn't know what it is. Time, 15:20. Subject, passenger to be. Statement re. My daughter's photograph, got her father's features, I assume. She listed the witnesses. Robert, the flight attendant, the older man in 3A, Chloe from Business Insider. She noted the captain's recognition. She was building a case, not for a lawsuit, but for herself. A testament that this happened. That she was not overreacting. That the injustice was real, measurable, and witnessed. When the meal service came, she ordered her food politely. She ate slowly, with a grace that seemed to unnerve Gavin more than any outburst could have. She was no longer the reactive target. She was an observer, a chronicler. She had taken back the narrative. Then, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. It was moderate, the kind that makes the wings dip and the seatbelt sign illuminate with a sharp ping. The cabin shuddered. Gavin, mid-sip of his gin and tonic, sloshed it over his hand in expensive slacks. He cursed loudly. Kendra, who had flown many times to visit Amara, who had endured far worse bumps, simply tightened her belt and looked back out the window, a faint, serene smile touching her lips. In that moment, the universe itself seemed to be commenting on the imbalance in row 2. The man who thought he controlled everything was spilled and furious. The woman he deemed insignificant was calm, unshaken, anchored in a purpose deeper than his understanding. The power had not shifted to her yet, but the axis had tilted. She was ready. C turbulence passed. The cabin settled. Gavin, mopping at his pants with a napkin, was a portrait of frayed irritation. The PA system crackled once more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain again. Sorry for the bumps. We're through the worst of it. I hope everyone is comfortable and enjoying the flight. As we have a little time, I'd like to take a moment for a special announcement." Robert, the flight attendant, looked up from the galley, a curious frown on his face. Special announcements were for birthdays or anniversaries, not mid-flight over Nebraska. Marcus's voice continued, warm and personal now, shedding its purely professional tone. "It's not often I get to make an announcement like this, but today is a unique day. Aboard our flight, we have a very special passenger, a woman who is on her way to witness her daughter graduate with top honors in aerospace engineering from a prestigious university." A soft murmur of approval rippled through the cabin. People smiled, looking around. "In my line of work," Marcus continued, his voice thickening with emotion, "I have immense respect for the people who build, maintain, and clean these incredible machines, the ones whose work is often unseen but is absolutely essential to safety, to comfort, to everything we do up here. The unsung heroes." Kendra's breath caught. She closed her eyes. "And this passenger," Marcus said, "is one of those heroes. For over 2 decades, she has worked as a custodian, maintaining the office buildings where dreams are drafted and deals are made. She has done this with pride, with dedication, and with a singular goal, to give her daughter a future full of possibilities she herself never had." Gavin had gone very still. His face was ashen. "So today," Marcus said, his voice ringing clear through every speaker, "I would like the cabin to join me in recognizing Ms. Kendra Williams. In seat 2A, she used her hard-earned savings to purchase a first-class ticket, a well-deserved respite on her way to her mother's greatest milestone. Kendra, on behalf of the entire crew and myself, we salute you. Your dedication, your strength, and your love are what truly make this world fly. Congratulations." For a second, there was stunned silence. Then, applause broke out. It started with Robert in the galley clapping firmly. The older man in 3A joined, then the woman across the aisle who had initially laughed. Soon, the entire first-class cabin was applauding. Not a wild ovation, but a sustained, respectful, heartfelt sound. Passengers leaned into the aisle, smiling at Kendra, nodding their respect. Kendra felt the tears then. They weren't tears of humiliation or anger, but of a profound, shocking release. The weight of 23 years of invisible labor was seen, was acknowledged, was valued in the most public way imaginable. She looked around at the smiling faces, at Robert's proud nod, and the injustice of the last 2 hours dissolved. In the warmth of this collective recognition, the reveal was complete. The janitor was the hero. The important man was the footnote, but Marcus wasn't finished. Furthermore, his voice came back, now cool and authoritative. "As captain of this aircraft, the safety and comfort of all my passengers is my paramount concern. That includes ensuring an environment free from harassment or discrimination of any kind. I've been made aware of concerns regarding passenger conduct in the forward cabin. My senior crew member will be speaking with the involved individual momentarily, who have a zero-tolerance policy for behavior that compromises the dignity of any person on this flight. Thank you." The applause died away, replaced by a thick, pregnant silence. All eyes turned to Gavin Thorne. Robert appeared at his side, his expression stern. "Mr. Thorne, a word please." In the galley, Gavin looked like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smugness, the bluster, had evaporated, leaving behind a shell of a man publicly and officially reprimanded. He unbuckled his belt with trembling hands and stood, avoiding every eye, and followed Robert to the back of the cabin, his walk of shame witnessed by all. The justice was not vengeful. It was procedural, authoritative, and devastatingly final. The truth had been exposed. Kendra's worth, Gavin's smallness. The power had shifted, not through a shouting match, but through a captain's microphone and the weight of simple, stated truth. Chloe from Business Insider was now staring at her laptop screen as if it were on fire. She began typing frantically, then stopped, deleted, and slowly, deliberately, closed her laptop. She did not look at the empty seat beside her. Kendra picked up the photograph of Amara. She held it to her heart. She had come for dignity, and, after a brutal trial, it had been returned to her, multiplied. Not by a man saving her, but by a man finally seeing her and, in doing so, compelling an entire plane to see her too. The final hour of the flight passed in a kind of peaceful haze. The cabin crew treated Kendra with a gentle, reverential kindness. Robert brought her a dessert she hadn't ordered, with the captain's compliments. The older man in 3A leaned over and said, "Your daughter is lucky to have you. Congratulations." Gavin Thorne returned to his seat after 20 minutes in the galley. He did not speak another word for the rest of the flight. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask of stunned humiliation. The system he believed he commanded had turned on him, and the currency of his influence, his bluster, his wealth, his perceived status had been rendered worthless at 37,000 feet. He was just a man in a stained pair of pants who had been morally and publicly bankrupted. When the plane landed and the seatbelt sign chimed off, Kendra gathered her things slowly, deliberately. She was in no rush. As she stood, Marcus emerged. From the cockpit, he stood by the flight deck door, waiting. Their eyes met across the heads of deplaning passengers. When the cabin was nearly empty, she approached him, and they stood there, in the hushed space near the cockpit, the ambient noise of the airport a distant rumble. "Kendra," he said, his voice rough. "Marcus," she replied. Are you all right?" She looked at him, rarely looked at him. She saw the boy she'd loved, the man who'd left, the father who'd tried, and now, the ally who had spoken up. The history between them was a continent, but in this moment, they stood on a small, peaceful island. "I am now," she said, and she meant it. "Thank you, not for saving me, for seeing me, for seeing me." He nodded, his own eyes bright. "I always saw you. I was just looking from the wrong angle for a long time." He paused. "Amara's graduation. She asked me to come. I have a layover. Would it be all right if I was there?" In the back, Kendra considered it. This wasn't a fairy tale reunion. The past was still there, with all its wounds. But Amara's day was about the future, and perhaps a different kind of justice was a fractured family finding a new, peaceful shape. "She'd want you there," Kendra said softly. "We'll be in the third row." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I'll find you." She walked off. The plane, her head high, her heart full. The uniform she wore no longer felt like a marker of status, but a badge of a different kind of honor. She had built a life with these hands. She had raised a giant of a daughter. And today, she had remembered her own strength. In the terminal, she saw Gavin Thorne, alone, hurriedly tapping on his phone, probably trying to control a narrative that had already flown away from him. She felt no hatred, only a distant, quiet pity. He was a man who would likely never understand why his world had tilted today, because he could not see the foundational worth in anyone but himself. His punishment was to live inside that small, lonely world. Kendra walked towards the baggage claim, towards her daughter, towards a celebration she would now enjoy with a soul that felt lighter, cleaner, and fiercely, unshakably free. The lesson wasn't that bullies always get their comeuppance on airplanes. It was that dignity is an internal flame, and no one can extinguish it without your permission. Sometimes, holding your ground in silence is an act of war. Sometimes, justice arrives not in a roar, but in a captain's calm, unwavering voice, over a speaker system, reminding everyone what true value looks like. And sometimes, the most powerful transformation happens not when your circumstances change, but when you decide, deep in your own soul, that you will no longer cooperate with your own diminishment, is simply, quietly, stop handing them the map. The jet bridge felt like a passage between worlds. Behind her was the pressurized container of judgment and redemption. Ahead was the sprawling, echoing terminal, a cathedral of ordinary human journeys. The sound of her shoes on the grated floor was a steady, purposeful rhythm. With each step, the final remnants of tension seeped out through her soles. She could still feel the phantom pressure of every gaze from the cabin, the mockery, the pity, the indifference, and finally, the respect. They were like layers of paint, and the final coat, the one of honor, had covered all the rest. She didn't go directly to baggage claim. She found a quiet alcove near a window overlooking the tarmac. She needed a moment in the neutral air to let the adrenaline settle into something she could carry. Leaning against the cool glass, she watched a ground crew at work, their figures small and purposeful under the belly of a distant aircraft. She saw a woman in a high-visibility vest directing a fuel truck with graceful, precise gestures. Unseen, essential work. Marcus's words circled in her mind. He had given language to her life, a eulogy for a career she had never thought required one. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Amara, landed yet, superstar. Can't wait to hug you. I have news. Attached was a selfie of Amara, her braids crowned with a silver mortarboard tassel, her smile incandescent even through the pixelated screen. Kendra's breath hitched. This was the point. This was the North Star that had guided her through every graveyard shift, every aching muscle, every silent insult swallowed. She typed back, her fingers steady now. Just landed. You are my news. See you soon. Love you to the moon and back. She didn't mention the flight. That story was hers to hold, for now. It was a stone she would polish in private before, perhaps, one day, placing it in her daughter's hand as an heirloom of resilience. As she walked towards the baggage carousel, she saw him. Gavin Thorne was standing rigidly by a pillar, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, though she couldn't make out the words, was sharp, defensive. His free hand chopped at the air. He was trying to reassemble his shattered authority, to explain the unexplainable to some underling or client on the other end of the line. The stained patch on his trousers was a visible badge of his unraveling. He was a man frantically trying to glue a broken vase back together in public. She felt no shock, only a detached observation. His punishment was ongoing. It was the prison of his own character, and he would be its warden for the rest of his life. Chloe, the podcast journalist, hurried past him without a glance, her roller bag clacking behind her. She was on her phone too, but her tone was different, low, urgent, excited. Kendra caught a fragment. No, forget the Thorne interview. I have a much better pitch. A human interest piece on invisible labor and public dignity. Yeah, from today, ... I witnessed it ... Cliff disappeared into the crowd, her narrative already pivoting, adapting to the new truth she'd been forced to witness. The market had spoken, and Gavin Thorne was no longer a valuable commodity. Kendra collected her simple, sturdy suitcase. It was the last piece of her old journey. As she turned, she saw Marcus. He was still in his uniform, pulling his own pilot's case, standing near the service exit. He was waiting. Not for her, she realized, but to see that she was okay, that she had cleared the field. He gave her one final, slow nod. It wasn't a claim, it was an acknowledgement, a passing of the baton. She nodded back, a peace treaty written in silence. Then he turned and vanished through the staff door, back to his world of sky and procedural. That evening, at a small family-owned restaurant Amara had chosen, they celebrated, just the two of them at a corner table, a candle flickering between them. Over shared desert, Amara leaned forward. Okay, spill your transformative flight. What really happened? You have a certain glow, and it's not just because of me. Kendra smiled, tracing the rim of her water glass. She had decided to share it, not as a trauma, but as a parable. There was a man on the plane, she began, her voice calm. He didn't think I belonged in my seat. He said quite a few things to make sure I, and everyone else, knew it. Amara's smile vanished. Her eyes, so like her father's in shape, but blazing with her mother's fire, hardened. Mom, what did you do? At first, Kendra said, I did what I've always done. I took it. I built a wall inside myself and let it hit the wall. I thought of you. I held my ground by staying silent. Amara reached across the table, covering her mother's hand. You shouldn't have to let me finish. Baby, Kendra said gently, squeezing her hand. I did that for a while, and it was eating me alive, because I realized I was on my way to celebrate you, a young black woman who was going to literally help design spacecraft, and I was showing you, by my silence, that the way to handle a bully was to endure him. That didn't sit right with my spirit, she told her then. Not every cruel word, but the shape of the conflict, the snapping fingers, the public performance, the asking for the pilot. And then the pilot came out, Kendra said, a new lightness entering her voice. And it was your father. Amara's eyes widened. Dad was flying your plane. Kendra nodded. He saw me. He saw the whole thing. And later, he made an announcement. She recounted Marcus's words, the public recognition of her work, her journey, her motherhood, the applause, the shift. Amara listened, rapt. When Kendra finished, Amara sat back, a slow, proud smile spreading across her face. He did that, in front of everyone. He did, and the man was invited to the galley by the head flight attendant. He spent the rest of the flight in what I imagine was a very profound silence. Amara laughed, a sound of pure, ringing justice. Good. Then her expression sobered. But Mum, the real victory wasn't what Dad did. It was what you did before he ever opened his mouth. You said you stopped accepting it. How? Kendra thought of the notes app on her phone, of the deliberate chewing of her food, of looking out the window at the boundless sky. I stopped seeing myself through his eyes. I started seeing myself through my own, and through yours. I remembered who I was, and more importantly, why I was there. I claimed my space, not just in the seat, but in the story. He became a character in my narrative, not the other way around. That's when the power shifted. The captain's announcement was just the public confirmation. Amara was silent for a long moment, taking it in. You know, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. At NASA, in my interviews, they kept asking about resilience, about overcoming obstacles in team dynamics. I talked about late-night study groups and technical problems. But the real training, the real PhD in resilience, came from watching you my whole life, from watching you build a world out of nothing but will and love. That man on the plane, he was just the final exam, and you aced it. Kendra felt her tears return, but they were sweet now. A bomb. Her daughter understood. The legacy was not one of bitterness, but of profound strength. The cycle was not of trauma, but of transformation. The flight home, 3 days later, was different. Kendra was in first class again, a gift Amara had insisted on with part of her first fellowship stipend. You're flying back in triumph, she'd said. Do it in style. This time, Kendra wore a simple, elegant linen dress. She carried a new bag, a graduation gift from Amara. She looked like what she was, a woman of substance, a mother of a creator, a person at peace. The crew was different, the passengers were different, but the space was the same. As she settled into her window seat, a young flight attendant brought her a glass of water without being asked. Welcome aboard, ma'am. Let me know if you need anything at all. Kendra smiled her thanks. She looked out at the runway, at the vast architecture of flight. She thought of Amara, who would now help design these machines. She thought of Marcus, somewhere in another cockpit, navigating by stars and instruments. She thought of Gavin Thorne, likely still telling himself a story where he was the wronged party. And she thought of herself, Kendra Williams, custodian, mother, unseen, essential, publicly honored. She had been all of those things on the way here. Now, she was going home as something simpler and more powerful herself. Whole dot, as the plane lifted off, climbing through a bank of clouds into the blinding sunlit blue, she felt no weight, only lift. The past was behind her, a country she had visited and learned from. The future was ahead, bright and open, and the present, this serene, buoyant moment in the sky, was a gift she had given herself. The injustice had been a stone in her shoe. She had not just removed it, she had used it to build a step, to rise higher. And from this new altitude, the view was breathtaking. A month later, back in her routine, Kendra was cleaning the executive washroom on the 45th floor. The citrus bleach scent was the same. The shine she left on the faucet was the same, but she was different. Her phone, propped on the counter, buzzed with a podcast notification. It was Business Insider. The title, The Invisible Engine, Dignity, Labor, and the Stories We Miss. The host was Chloe Benson. Kendra, wiping down the mirror, listened as Chloe's voice, wiser and less eager now, recounted an anonymous story about a flight, a janitor, a bully, and a captain's intervention. Chloe spoke about meritocracies that only value certain kinds of work, about the architecture of disrespect, and the quiet power of recognition. She never named names, but she ended with a dedication to the unseen essential workers. We are flying because you are the ground. Kendra smiled at her reflection in the now sparkling mirror. Later that week, a formal letter arrived at Apex Building Services, addressed to her. It was from the CEO of Sterling Financial, the tenant in the tower she cleaned. It commended her exemplary service of over 2 decades and announced a new company-wide initiative in partnership with Apex, the Unseen Essential Professional Development Grant. The first recipient, the letter stated, had been selected, Kendra Williams. It included full tuition for a fully online business management degree program of her choosing. Robert, the flight attendant, had kept the captain's note with Kendra's name and company details. Marcus, it seemed, had followed up, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, bureaucratic nudge that changed her life. Justice sometimes wears the clothes of procedure. Kendra enrolled. She began her classes at night, after her shifts. The knowledge felt different, now not an escape from her work, but an extension of it. She started mentoring younger custodial staff, teaching them not just how to clean, but how to document irregularities, to understand their contracts, to see themselves as professionals. The ripple of that one flight, that one confrontation, continued. It moved through podcast airwaves, through corporate policy, through the spirit of a woman who now carried herself with an unchallengeable authority. Gavin Thorne's mockery had aimed to shrink her world. It had, instead, catalyzed its expansion. One evening, during her online class discussion forum, the topic was ethical leadership. A classmate posted a hypothetical about handling discriminatory behavior in a corporate setting. Kendra's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought of a plain cabin, of the weight of public shame, and the liberating power of a voice, speaking truth into a microphone. She began to type. True leadership isn't about wielding power over others. It's about using your authority to illuminate worth where others have tried to cast shadow. It's about recognizing that the health of any system, a company, a community, an aircraft, depends on the dignity of every single person within it. The first step to justice is often simply a refusal to participate in the fiction that someone is less than they are. Sometimes, that refusal is a quiet internal revolution. Sometimes, it needs a microphone, but it always starts with seeing clearly, and then, courageously, speaking what you see. She hit post. Across the country, Amara, in her new lab at NASA, looked at a complex stress diagram for a lightweight alloy. She thought of structures, of integrity, of things that hold together under pressure. She thought of her mother. The most resilient structures, she knew, weren't those that were hardest and most rigid. They were those that could absorb shock, distribute stress, and bend without breaking. They had flexibility at their core, and a profound understanding of their own purpose. Her mother was the strongest material she knew, and in a cockpit somewhere over the Atlantic, Captain Marcus Thorne finished his pre-descent checklist. His first officer mentioned an article he'd read about workplace culture. Marcus listened, then gazed out at the panorama of stars above and the distant, twinkling lights of cities below. It's all connected, Marcus said, more to himself than to his colleague. The people who build the rooms, who clean the rooms, who fly the machines between the rooms. We're all just passing through. The least we can do is ensure everyone gets to keep their dignity for the journey. The plane began its gentle, inexorable descent, returning to the earth, to the world of flaws that needed buffing and dreams that needed building, guided by hands both seen and unseen, all of them essential, all of them holding up the sky.